I mean, the first thing, let me restate the thing that I said before, which is that it is consistent with longstanding practice for the leader of a foreign government, when they're planning to visit the United States, to contact and coordinate that visit with the leader of the United States. And so, the invitation that was extended and the acceptance of that invitation did represent a departure from protocol. But ultimately, it's the responsibility of the Speaker of the House to make decisions about the floor schedule of the House of Representatives. President, at this point, does not plan to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu on a visit that apparently is scheduled for March. The reason for that is that Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit comes about 2 weeks before the Israeli elections. And this administration goes to great lengths to ensure that we don't give even the appearance of interfering or attempting to influence the outcome of a democratically held election in another country. This president has certainly not allowed the disagreement over our Iran approach to in any way shake the commitment of the United States to the national security of Israel.
President Obama snubbing the Israeli prime minister. Today, the White House announced that President Obama will not meet with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when he comes to Washington in March. He will address Congress at the request of House Speaker John Boehner, an invitation that Boehner himself extended without consulting the White House on any of this. That ruffled some feathers, to be sure. Joining us now, our political panel, the Wall Street Journal's John Bussey and the National Review's Jillian Melchior. Good to have you both here tonight. Jillian, let me start with you. What do you make of the change of the date? It was going to be February 11th. Now it's going to be in March. And, it turns out the president won't be available then.
Well, I think it's pretty interesting that it's in the lead up to elections in Israel. That's been the Obama administration's excuse, that they don't want to be seen as supporting a candidate. But, I mean, this is a little bit facetious. That's kind of a disincentive about democratic government, isn't it? I just think this is a president who's stretched his hands out to so many people, clasped hands with Putin, and now he's not going to meet with Netanyahu.
We remember the things that some members of the administration said about Netanyahu. There's obviously a very uncomfortable relationship between these two men, and it comes at a time when the president seems to very much want to deal with Iran, which is not something that's going to go over well in a closed-door session with Benjamin Netanyahu.
Right. You just summed it up. These are two people who don't get along, and Iran is right center stage. The argument that you don't see somebody close to the election, the president is saying that's been long-standing protocol. There's an election coming up in March. The party of Netanyahu, Likud, is running behind the Labour Party. So that's a pretty good argument. But it goes to this Iran question. Netanyahu's a hawk, does not want the U.S. to broker a deal with Iran, wants more sanctions. Boehner feels similarly. Netanyahu will speak to the hawk element within Congress, and Obama doesn't like that.
Yeah. So what do you make of John Boehner's move here, Julian? Clearly he went around the White House to set this up, and it's a way to speak directly to the American people, right?
Yeah, I think it's a bold move on his behalf. I think what Boehner probably realizes is that, the longer we talk with Iran, the longer we spend negotiating, the more time that buys them to work on their nuclear project. I think he is attempting to take Congress in a way that sends a bold message to Iran, even if the president won't.
It's so stunning when you think about what we're discussing here, that the leader of Israel is coming to the United States, one of our greatest allies, and the president seems to be, sort of seeking a backdoor and an excuse not to speak with him?
Well, it's politics. It's a bit of soap opera. And again, a long-standing disagreement between these two men on everything from settlement policy in Israel to Iran to the peace negotiations to the Gaza war. So it goes pretty deep. But in this instance, politics is politics. Cameron was just in town speaking to Congress people on behalf of the administration's position. There's a little bit of disingenuousness in saying that Netanyahu now came.
But when you think about what Liz Cheney said, she pointed out four, capital centers in the Middle East that Iran now has a tremendous amount of influence over. 4 of them.
Yeah.
In Syria, in Libya, she pointed out. She talked about Yemen as well. And so we have Iran increasing its influence in all of these power centers, and then you've got our ally coming from Israel to speak to Congress. It's just it's a situation I don't think anybody would have imagined a couple of years ago.
It's crazy, and I think what really drives me nuts about this is, first of all, nothing in the Middle East has gotten better under Obama. And second, here he is saying that we want diplomacy, not military, yet he won't even meet with a key player right now while he's in Washington. That's just hypocritical, and it doesn't make sense.
Thank you very much, John and Jillian. We'll see you later.
Thank you.
Back later. Thanks for that.
Prime Minister Netanyahu's plans to address Congress on March 3rd 2 weeks before the Israeli election, is causing new fractures in an already brittle relationship. The White House is furious with the Israeli leader for accepting House Speaker John Boehner's invitation. Aides say last week President Obama, in an angry phone call, warned Netanyahu not to interfere in his battle with Congress over Iran sanctions. But they say Netanyahu secretly plotted to do the opposite, arranging behind the president's back to deliver a speech critical of his policy.
Certainly, if we had the opportunity to weigh in on that schedule a little bit more, we would welcome that opportunity and probably make a variety of changes.
It's the latest confrontation in a series of growing tensions between the two allies. Last March, in a testy Oval Office meeting, Netanyahu rebuffed Obama's attempts to accept a peace deal with Palestinians. In October, the White House denied the Israeli defense minister high-level meetings over his harsh criticism of Secretary of State John Kerry's peace efforts. But frustrations reached new heights after a top White House official used an expletive to describe Netanyahu, saying in an interview with Atlantic magazine he had, quote, no guts to make peace with the Palestinians. U.S. officials say Secretary Kerry, who in the last month made more than 50 phone calls to allies on behalf of Israel to stop action in the UN Security Council and International Criminal Court, is running out of patience.
If the administration wants to get anywhere on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, on dealing with Iran, on stabilizing the region, they're going to have to find a way to manage their relationship with Israel.
U.S. officials insist Washington's support for Israel's security will remain despite political tensions. But the timing couldn't be worse, as the Middle East itself teeters on the brink.
Breaking tonight, ugly new fallout in the showdown between the White House and the Israeli Prime Minister. And the stakes are very high. Welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. Today, it got personal and it got angry. Israeli media reports say White House officials unloaded on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after he accepted an invitation from Congress to speak about the threat from Iran, a move made without anyone consulting the administration. The story in the Haaretz newspaper quoted one senior White House official as saying Netanyahu, quote, spat in our face publicly, and that's no way to behave, adding that, quote, there will be a price. Charles Krauthammer is here, but first, Trace Gallagher reports live in our West Coast newsroom. Trace?
Megyn, the White House would like to have weighed in on the Netanyahu visit and does believe it's a violation of protocol, but in the end says it's up to Speaker of the House John Boehner to decide who addresses Congress. Now, that's the on-the-record version. Behind the scenes, the administration appears to be furious, with a senior official telling the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, quoting again, Netanyahu ought to remember that President Obama has a year and a half left to his presidency and that there will be a price. President Obama believes Netanyahu's speech to Congress could rally opposition to a nuclear deal with Iran, undercutting years of negotiations. The president and prime minister have publicly clashed before, primarily over Israeli settlements in the West Bank. And it's also not the first time senior administration officials have issued anonymous and acrimonious statements, even reportedly calling Netanyahu a, quote, chicken blank. The Washington Post says Secretary of State John Kerry is also highly offended by Netanyahu's apparent disrespect. Kerry has been pushing for the United Nations to not set a timeline for establishing a Palestinian state. And a source close to Kerry says, quote, playing politics with that relationship could blunt Secretary Kerry's enthusiasm for being Israel's prime defender. At least during this visit, there won't be any awkward public appearances between Obama and Netanyahu because the president won't be meeting him, apparently because it's too close to the Israeli elections. Listen.
And this administration goes to great lengths to ensure that we don't give even the appearance of interfering or attempting to influence the outcome of a democratically held election in another country.
Although we should note, back in 1996, Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres did meet with President Clinton less than a month before his election against Benjamin Netanyahu. Megyn.
Trace, thank you. Just before we came to air, I spoke with syndicated columnist and author of the book Things That Matter, Charles Krauthammer, who says this is a critical moment between the United States and one of our best allies. Charles, your take on what appears to be a growing escalation in the war of words between the White House and the Prime Minister of Israel, and the White House's response to Netanyahu's acceptance of this invitation he received from John Boehner.
Well, what's astonishing is how personal and petulant is the administration response. Reducing this to a kind of schoolyard brawl. What prompted this, I think, at least on the part of the Speaker of the House inviting Netanyahu, is the unprecedented thing that happened just a few days earlier, even before the State of the Union, when the Prime Minister of Britain was here in the United States and admitted openly to lobbying senators on the nuclear issue. And he even admitted that's unprecedented. So on the one hand, you get the administration using foreign leaders to lobby Congress. And on the other hand, you're saying that it's somehow illegitimate, lack of protocol to invite the Israeli Prime Minister. And remember, the stakes are so different. For the British, this is sort of an abstract issue, possible threat way down the road. For the Israelis, this is life and death. The Iranians openly declare their intention, their mission to eradicate Israel. They write on their missiles, death to Israel, and they are obviously developing a bomb. So for the Israelis, this is whether the Jewish state will exist and whether another 6 million Jews will be wiped out. That's a very serious issue. I think the Prime Minister has a right to speak on it at a very critical moment in these negotiations.
It's clear that the White House doesn't appear to like Netanyahu. Not sure if Netanyahu feels much for Obama and Kerry, President Obama and John Kerry either. But the sort of petulance in the response about he better remember that Barack Obama has another year and a half left in office. I mean, have the relations between the United States, the White House, and Israel been this tense in recent history?
No, I don't think so. I think this president has less personal sympathy for Israel than any president in the history, the near 70-year history of Israel. And I think it shows. I mean, look at the way he's treated Netanyahu early in the administration, long before any of this. He had Netanyahu leave the White House by a rear entrance. The way that they have reacted whenever there's been some kind of argument over policy, they immediately have made it a personal issue. And I think that's when you allow that to intrude. Remember, the mission that a president has is to defend and advance the national interest of the United States. And when it becomes a personal thing, that gets in the way. Israel is our strongest ally in the region, democratic and committed to the West. Iran has been responsible for the deaths of thousands of Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan. The State Department itself says it's the largest, the biggest exporter of terrorism in the world. And Obama treats their leadership with utmost respect and treats Israel, our ally, with none.
In the meantime, Iran, as you write in your column this week, is on the march. I mean, this issue about which Israel is so concerned, and we say we are so concerned, is greater than just Iranian-Israeli relations. Iran is gaining power.
Well, the story that goes mostly unwritten is that the ones who are the most apoplectic about the rise of Iran, the fact that it looks as if Obama is ready to concede to them threshold nuclear status, are the Gulf Arabs. The Arabs have no deterrent. The Israelis at least have their own bomb. The Gulf Arabs are very rich and extremely weak. They rely and have for 2 generations on the United States. They not only see Obama essentially conceding the bomb to Iran, which will make it dominant and hegemonic in the entire region, but they look around and they see Iranian influence intruding itself in a whole stretch of states, going all the way from Iran to the Mediterranean, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and now, as of yesterday, Yemen to their south. If you look at the map, you see our friends, the Gulf Arabs and the Jordanians, they are now surrounded by Iran and its satellites. And that is happening apart from the nuclear issue. And they look at this and see the United States, this is in the Arab view, having abdicated and having withdrawn, and now ready to go all the way and to allow Iran to go nuclear.